interpret as hidden history, just from the aspect that it's not open all the time. We talked a little bit about how Exhibition Place holds some very old military history for the city of Toronto, dating back to 1793, when all of the land here was reserved for quite a different purpose than you see today. It was reserved for use by the British military. And in 1793, when the British shut up the town of York, which is about 2.5 kilometers east of here, that part of the town that became the city of Toronto, they set up a military reserve here. Why do they have so much space reserved for the military? There were still a lot of ongoing tensions between America and Great Britain. And the Americans decided to declare war on Great Britain in the summer in June of 1812, right? So instead of sailing across the Atlantic and going up the Thames, the British or the Americans decided to attack Upper Canada because this was British territory, right? So that's where they came. They landed, the Americans landed in April of 1813 around where Sunnyside Beach is today. And they fought their way east, there was a skirmish at the clearing of Old Fort Rouge, and the Americans kind of overcame the British. The Americans numbered about 2,200. The British, the militia, and the indigenous people who were supporting them numbered about 700 or 800. So the Americans overwhelmed them by about 3-1, and the fight continued this way. And over around where the Antiquary Center was, there was a gunpowder magazine where the locals again tried to hold off the Americans. And tragedy struck. Somebody here dropped a lit, like a match, like a fire starter, into the gunpowder, and there was an enormous explosion, and it destroyed the Western Battery. And that's why if you take the 509 streetcar along here, you come across all these names like Western Battery Road and all this kind of stuff through here. But the Americans continued to Fort York, and the militia and the military here took in shelter behind Old Fort York and decided to blow up the gunpowder magazine, resulting in one of the largest explosions in the history of the British Army, right? So that was the invasion of York. But the battle that was fought here resulted in many deaths and casualties. And again, I don't want to present like the grim side to Exhibition Place, but many of the remains were buried where they fell. So this is a cemetery, basically. And again, not to present like dark, spooky history about Exhibition Place or anything like that, but it was the battle that was actually fought. So that brings us to this building. This was built in 1841 as a replacement for historic Fort York, which some of you may have visited already. And this was to be called New Fort York. It was built by the Royal Engineers, and it was constructed out of brick. There were 6 buildings that enclosed this parade square made out of brick or stone, whereas if you go to Old Fort York, if you've been there, you notice about half the buildings there are made out of wood, right? This lasted until the 1890s, when the new Fort York, this one here, was renamed the Stanley Barracks after Lord Stanley, who was the Governor General, and the same guy who gave the Stanley Cup to Toronto. The major difference being is you can still find the Stanley Barracks. So this is it, right? The British occupied this until about 1870, when they transferred all the military over to the Canadian Army, and then it was transferred to the city about 1911. The barracks saw military service during the Second World War, and then it was converted in the 1950s. 5 of the original 6 buildings were demolished. We saw quite a few demolished buildings over this way, and it was recycled for other use. It was used for Canada's Sports Hall of Fame in 1955, and then for the next few years, the Hockey Hall of Fame. A lot of people may remember when the Upper Canada Marine Museum was here, and there was a tugboat that was located right here. And there was also a statue of Toronto's first internationally famous athlete, was a rower by the name of Ned Hanlon, and his statue used to be here. But both the statue and the tugboat were moved down to Hanlon's Point. So if you ever go down to the Toronto Islands for some reason, think of them down there. And they were moved on in here. At one point in the 1950s, the building was also used for emergency social housing. And that's when Toronto was expanding, Canada was expanding its immigration laws. And if you, any of you went on other two neighborhood tours today or this weekend, you might have heard of an activist named Jean Lum. I don't know if that name rings a bell to anybody, but she acted was an activist against the government to get them to increase immigration. So there was, the history of Toronto is the history of a need for affordable housing, right? So that's still a problem we have today. Having spoken all that, you see why I try to stick to my notes. I got a lot to say, but I want to give you the chance. Sort of the high point of the tour, in one way, is our ability today to go inside and take a look around.